Hello everybody, it's Ariko, and this video is a summary of my findings as I've been researching into the giants in Xenoblade. It's been really interesting, and I'm happy to present theories about both how the mysterious giants came into being, as well as another about how they disappeared. I have also constructed a timeline for the history of the giants based on the locations and architecture, and whatever bits and scraps of lore I could pick up. By the way, this video has been pretty long in the making, and I would really appreciate if you subscribe to our channel. It really does mean a lot to us. And by the way, after this video is over, I would love to read anything you might have to say about this video or the theories I'm making public here, whether you just have a question about something, or if you'd like to let me know your thoughts on everything. Anyways, let's begin. The main story of Xenoblade doesn't explicitly tell us all that much about the giants, an ancient race which used to exist on the Bionis. There's some mention of them here and there, but really, if all you do is play the main storyline, your understanding of them doesn't go much beyond that they simply existed. You get to learn a little bit more in side quests, which take you out to various giants' ruins, but the NPCs you're helping out don't explicitly tell you much. You get the feeling that they are learning a lot more about the giants than you are getting to. All you really get told is about how they supposedly got killed off, confined by white spiders in Tephra Cave. And you have to ask, really? A race of giant beings lived all over Bionis, and all this game can tell me about them is how they died off? What about how they lived, their history? And are we really to believe that a race that has ruins across all of Bionis all died because of these white spiders? There has to be more to the story than that. Thankfully, there is. A lot more. To understand the true history of the giants, we've got to go digging. Giants' ruins are just riddled all across Bionis. You can find remnants of the giants pretty much anywhere you go. Tephra Cave, Bionis Leg, Satoral Marsh, Machna Forest, Valak Mountain, Era Sea, and of course the Bionis Shoulder. That's almost every area in the game. As you investigate giants' ruins, it's very important to pay attention to the architecture, in terms of both scale and design. If I were to go over the features of each and every ruin, this video would be never ending. So to get to the point, there are 4 distinct types of giants' ruins you can observe on Bionis. First, we have what I'd say are the most obvious type of giants' ruins, the ones of Satoral Marsh and Machna Forest. They share the same style of floor and wall pattern, as well as the same type of brick. The Machna Forest tomb is King Agni's tomb, a prominent figure among the giants, as several other locations in the game are named after him. Importantly, there are 2 locations on the Bionis Shoulder, his birthplace and his Sky Garden. The Bionis Shoulder is host to a wide variety of different ruin sites, and very notably is listed as the birthplace of the giants. This is where the history of the beings called the giants began, according to the game. Most of these structures that can be found here are of the exact same style as can be found on the Bionis Leg, such as with the large columns and the guideposts, but on the shoulder seem to be in better condition, perhaps due to the lands not being inhabited by sentient life forms from what we can tell. Regardless, most of the ruins on the Bionis Shoulder, and all the ruins on the Bionis Leg, are the second type of giants' ruins. On the shoulder, while not in livable condition, this is the only place on Bionis we can see actual individual homes of the giants still intact. These structures help to give idea of their size. Giants which lived on the Bionis Shoulder were over twice the size of modern homs, and can be expected to have appeared most similarly to Argilus, who is 14 feet tall himself, and who we see on the Bionis Shoulder during his cutscene with Egil. This was also the very spot he took hold of the Monado. These ruins give us relative concept of when the giants existed on the Bionis Shoulder, and due to King Agni's resting place being in Machna Forest, it follows that some of the giants moved to lower portions of the Bionis over Agni's lifetime. Perhaps this was the group to also build the ruins on Bionis Leg due to those mentioned similarities. A large tomb was erected in honor of King Agni upon his death at Machna Forest, which uses a very different architecture style from what they had used so far. His coffin inside measures approximately 20 feet long. Likewise, as the architecture is very similar, it's likely that the Exile Fortress on Satoral Marsh was built around the same time. It's possible this may have been a throne that King Agni sat on himself. It's worth mentioning that this structure does have some connection to the ruins on the Bionis Leg. for you must obtain a mirror from the Daksha Shrine Giant's Ruins on the Bioness Leg for an ancient Giant's ritual used to obtain the artifact Daring of the Giants. This artifact was used along with 2 others to open another type of rune, a very ancient one, which will be our 3rd type of Giant's Runes. But quickly before that, I want you to take a look at that chest that the artifact is obtained from. Does it seem somehow familiar to you at all? Does it remind you of anything? This is where things start to get a little bit more interesting. With its dark color and the sort of bony, spiny design, this chest may bring to mind Prison Island. And as you'll see, that's no coincidence. This 3rd type of rune is characterized by things like bony, spine-like designs, a strong affinity for dragons, and statues of a certain mysterious ancient creature. The largest and most bountiful set of these runes is Prison Island, but 2 other locations can be found. The first being the runes at Three Sage Summit. These are the runes that are unlocked by the 3 giant treasures, the first of which was obtained from that chest at Satora Marsh, and the other 2 obtained from Shura and Lupa, who had hold of them as family heirlooms. The final can be found on the Bioness Shoulder, and it's called the Zekermeyer Quarry. Now then, if you go and explore Prison Island, you can find ample evidence that large beings lived here, and they were quite civilized too, in fact. They sat on giant chairs at giant tables, and ate giant food cooked in giant pots, using giant utensils. We can also observe giant weaponry, used not only against monsters, but from the looks of this arena, also for sport. There's some things you might find a bit weird about these ruins though. For one, Prison Island is supposed to be associated with the High Entia, right? Dixon claims that the island was built by their ancient ancestors. Later, upon arriving to the island, Melia recognizes the statues as potentially being the appearance of her forefathers, but then deconfirms what Dixon told the party about being built by the High Entia, saying stories tell of it existing far before her ancestors. The fact that the statues bear resemblance to Telethia shows she's probably right about them being her ancestors, one way or another at least. The island also uses similar transporter technology to the High Entias, and the High Entia are also the ones who used it to seal Zanza, and also were the ones to seal the island itself. The island just screams High Entia. The creatures sealed within the island also suggest the island's incredibly old age. These are creatures so old that they've only been observed as fossils among the High Entia, and as Melia said, stories tell of it existing long before her ancestors. We know that the High Entia, once with modern appearance, lived in peaceful relations with the giants, such as Arglus. So does this mean that this island also existed long before the giants as well? What is this island, and what is going on here? Well, here's 2 theories on this, both being possible, but one being a lot cooler, and in my opinion, more likely to being true as well. I'll go over the less out there theory first though. So firstly, one thing that is not explicitly confirmed in the game, but actually confirmed in the recently translated Secret Files Monado Archives book, which the link to can be found in the description, is that both the High Entia and the Giants came into being by granting intelligence to Telethia. So Telethia are the first creatures known to have existed, and the Giants and the High Entia are both equally as ancient to each other, being tied for oldest intelligent race. Going from this then, the first theory is that with the Giants being confirmed to first appearing on the Bioness Shoulder, these ruins, which are this quarry, are the most ancient ruins on Bioness. These Giants pay great respect to their origins, the Telethia, and raise a variety of statues to commemorate their ancestors. They make their way from the shoulder to Eris Sea and come to live in Prison Island. Perhaps this is some sort of giant's capital, with their ancestors, the Telethia, bearing a similarity to dragons. The ancient giants have an affinity with dragons, even worshipping them, and hailing existing dragons as kings. Do you remember, of course, that in Xenoblade, much of the monsters display significant levels of intelligence, so it's not as though these dragons are mindless beasts. Anyways, the quarry, Prison Island, and the ruins at Three Sage Summit on Valak Mountain are all constructed with a very dragon-esque architecture to further commemorate their ancestors and their kings. Some of the giants on the Bioness Shoulder start to change in culture and develop the new architecture style we see on Bioness Shoulder as well as on Bioness Leg and the history continues so on from there. That's all great, but now here's scenario 2, and this theory is a bit more wild, and I love it. So there's a couple different statues in Xenoblade related to the Hyantia, which a fair bit of attention is drawn to. These are the statues at Prison Island and in Alchemoth, and are both claimed to be the appearance of the Hyantia ancestors. In both cases, a lot of attention is drawn to their larger size and greatly different appearance. One NPC wonders why it would be beneficial for the Hyantia to become smaller, suggesting that this might be a de-evolution, but later coming to realize that there's really no such thing. A team of researchers comes to decipher ancient Hyantia text to reveal that the statues are actually depicting the High War God. However, this does not mean that Melia was entirely wrong about the statues depicting the ancient Hyantia, because if you even just look at humanity's depiction of gods, it's clear that, rather unimaginatively, most depictions of gods are made in our likeness. That's very likely for the ancient Hyantia as well. So, if these really are statues of the ancient Hyantia, rather than Telethia, what on Bionis do they have to do with the giants? Why are they at all of these different ancient giant ruins? Well, remember that the giants and the Hyantia are both listed as coming from Telethia. That's relevant for this theory as well. Suppose that the change from Telethia into sentient beings wasn't immediate, but rather a transition, an evolution. Then, you would expect that the Hyantia and the giants would share a common ancestor. Something that's not exactly a Telethia, more intelligent than that. Not a Hyantia either though, much more primitive in appearance than that, and much taller, like the size of a giant. They would look like this. Their name? Let's call them the Dragonkin. Who's more likely to live at the places with these statues than the beings depicted in the statues themselves? The Dragonkin are named so for their ability to fly and their similarity in appearance to dragons, due to their coming from Telethia, which also bear this resemblance. Not only this, they build their civilizations with very dragon-like structures, scaly walls and surfaces, horns, three-fingered hand-shaped wall torches, and of course, statues of dragons. They even worship dragons and herald actual live dragons as kings. There's nothing about them that doesn't scream dragon, and so the name Dragonkin would be most fitting. What they called themselves nobody can say, and in fact, if you think about it, did the giants even call themselves the giants, or is that just a name given to them in the centuries or millennia after their death? Anyways, you can imagine the Dragonkin to be somewhat similar in appearance to modern Cromar. A bit bigger, judging by their chairs, dining tables, and countertops, a bit over 2.5 hams height, so about 15 to 16 feet tall. Probably also a bit smarter, not to say the Cromar are unintelligent by any stretch of the imagination, given that they actually wield swords and shields, as well as clothing. Give those Cromar giant wings that they can use to fly, and probably a bit more of a bluish color to them like a Telethia, and you have yourself something like a Dragonkin. The Dragonkin came into being around the head of the Bionis, not venturing lower than the upper portions of Valak Mountain and the Bionis shoulder. They may very well have had their beginning within Prison Island itself, being that the island carries some divine importance, being a place of importance to Zanza used in the cycle of destruction and rebirth. Over time, the Dragonkin would evolve more arm-like appendages if they did not already have that, and the group of Dragonkin, which moved to the Bionis shoulder, would progressively lose their wings and become more like large humanoids, to eventually become what we would know today as the Giants. Like the Giants, the Hyantia would also become more humanoid over time, but shrinking in size. However, these little wing-like structures on the head would grow out, and the Hyantia would retain their ability to fly. While this story is less obvious, and so may seem a bit more out there, what I like about it, aside from just being pretty cool, is it does explain some things. For one, it explains why Prison Island is so heavily related to the Hyantia, despite seeming at first to be giants' ruins. It also explains why they would build these upper shelves to be so high, or how anything on Bionis could use these ridiculously massive cauldrons. All possible, if you can fly. Another thing is it gives an explanation to the Sani Telethia. The Sani Telethia is a one-of-a-kind Telethia. All Telethia, aside from the Sani Telethia, can be classified into 4 groups. The small Phoenix Telethia, the elegant Lycorn Telethia, the dragon-like Dracos Telethia, and the three-headed dragon Gigas Telethia. For whatever reason, this one got its own model, and guess what? It looks almost exactly like the Dragonkin. On top of this, it can communicate sophistically with Alvis, and after you kill it, it appears again at the end of the game as a spirit. Isn't this all a bit strange? Why is this Telethia so significant, and why would it have a spirit? Well, the way the theory explains it is the Sani Telethia would be a very early form of what would be the Dragonkin, only shortly after the Telethia started to evolve into a more sentient form. If true, this would make this one of the oldest creatures in existence, possibly the oldest. And we killed it! Well, don't feel too bad because it was self-defense. Now, whichever theory you choose to go with, if either, there's one more period in Giants history we have yet to cover. We covered the beginning of the Giants, so now it's time to cover the end, and there may be more to this than you realize. The final and most recent ruins of the Giants is the Balfalgar tomb in Tefra Cave, and this may also be a contender for the weirdest of all the Giants' ruins. Now, they're the Giants' ruins at the lowest part of the Bionis, which kind of makes sense, as the Giants seem to have a tendency to have moved lower on the Bionis over time, as they started at the top. These are the last of the Giants' ruins, as the texts within document the final history of the Giants. That's all fine and dandy, but now let's see if you can notice what's off about these ruins as I just walk through here a bit. There's definitely some distinct architecture from the other Giants' ruins, but what's actually the weirdest about these Giants' ruins is they aren't giants at all. Literally, a giant would not even fit in these ruins, and this is definitely not your typical Giant's coffin. Everything here is, well, very normally sized. It's Homs-sized, in fact. And so, at this point, something you need to ask is, what do you call a giant that is no longer giant? And what would they look like? Probably pretty familiar. And the next question is, did the Homs evolve from the Giants? Now, history as it was written in the tomb described that the Giants were forced into an oppressed existence behind closed doors at the hand of the White Spiders. However, Shura does not say that they all died out here. It is entirely possible that some had escaped. These Giants that escaped could be the ones to found what today would be called Colony 9. And there is one thing that this theory explains, which is the discrepancies between Dixon's giant form and Arglus. Although Dixon's giant form is slightly giantish, it is much smaller than Arglus's. So small, in fact, if you use Arglus as a baseline for how large giants are, which is appropriate given the sizes we observed on the Bionis shoulder, Dixon's height in his giant form is actually closer to Homs than it is to giants. Furthermore, whereas Arglus has purple skin and red eyes, Dixon has a lot more of a natural tannish skin and white eyes. Dixon could be a less ancient form of the giants, which are actually now starting to more resemble Homs than giants. And actually, if the Homs did come from the Giants, and the Giants share a common ancestor with the Hyentia, be it the Dragonkin or the Telethia, that's one possible explanation for why the Hyentia and the Homs can reproduce, similar to modern lions and tigers, who can create a liger. So anyways, just to recap, Giants history begins at the dark, dragon-esque Giants ruins on the Upper Bionis, and it's up to you to decide if this was actually inhabited by Giants, or if it was a race forgotten by history, which could be called the Dragonkin. From here, Giants change architecture style, which can be seen on the Bionis leg and the Bionis shoulder. King Agni is born during this time, and along with this we see another kind of architecture style at the tomb in Machna Forest and Satora Marsh. Finally, we have the Homs-sized Giants ruins in Tefra Cave, which give you a lot more to think about in terms of the history of the Giants, and if the Giants are truly gone, or if actually they've just become a bit less giant. And with that, I'd like to thank you for watching. I'd love to hear your thoughts or questions if you'd like to post them below. If you like this style of video, I am planning much more in the future like this, with some other topics potentially even more groundbreaking. If you don't want to miss that, do subscribe. We really appreciate the support. See you next time.